Hey guys, just wanted to say welcome to today's HR Forum, where we will be discussing retention, which is a hot topic at the moment. And I'm very thankful to have Mark Lindley joining us and presenting the forum for us today. Mark is an HR executive who has global experience in a diverse range of industries, and is able to share some really good insights and have some really good interactive conversations. So welcome, Mark, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Leanne. It's great to be part of this. When I had a look at those that are attending, it's a great cross section, people at various levels and that. And it's an area that I'm very passionate about because I think it's key to the operation of the business. If we don't have the right people doing the right job at the right time, we don't have a business. So from an HR perspective, I think this is a real critical topic.
Perfect. Well, Mark, as you said, we have a diverse range of HR professionals joining us today. Just a little bit of information for everyone on board. We do have a section which is for a chat. So if you have any particular queries or questions as we're running through the actual presentation, please put your question there and I'm able to ask Mark straight away. We will be going into sessions where we will be having everyone up on stage to be able to have a bit more of an interactive discussion around some of the topics. But I think if we get straight into it, that'll be great. I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Leanne. If we could just go to that first slide, that would be great. Perfect. I saw this photo and to me, I've used it so many times because it really sort of captures, the work environment, actually work environments that I've been in and work environments that I've actually seen. And when we look at retention, I think that we need to look at it in its broadest terms. If we can just move to the next slide. So the areas that we're going to cover, or I'd like to cover and absolutely get everyone's feedback is, where the focus should be, gaining full visibility with retention and, what is going to be the competitive advantage. There's a quote up there again. It's one of my favorites. If you're not looking after your people today, or the business is not looking after your people today, someone surely will tomorrow. So I look at where should the focus be. Most, when you talk about retention, people will say it's about retaining people. It's about sometimes reducing attrition, and it's trying to keep the good people longer. And I think that that's a facet. What I'd like to open up to the group, start to get people's feedback now on what do you see as retention? What are the core elements? What's the value in having a great retention strategy? So could we open that up, and it'd be really good to start getting some people's input, because we want to make this very interactive, and it's a great way that we can all learn from each other.
Perfect, Remy. We'll start bringing everyone up onto the stage because, as you say, it is a very big topic at the moment, and it's not just about retaining everyone. It's about retaining the right people in the business. So I think Remy's starting to bring everyone up onto the screen.
It's looking good. Who wants to jump in? What does it matter? Give a view. Tell me what you think about retention.
So Adam has posted a comment on the chat side and on the chat side of things, and he has said it's a happy workforce.
Okay, good approach. I think yes, is part of it. I don't. I think being happy in the workplace is key, but that also can take very different sort of dynamics. Adam, did you want to add more to that when you say a happy workforce? No, doesn't want to add to that. Okay, that's good. So look, I think what we need to consider are many things. I saw another one that said high engagement, low turnover. Absolutely. So yeah, I think that there's, I guess, many interpretations. I think what's key in the retention is that, yes, it's retaining good people. It's retaining the right people. And unfortunately, to retain the right people in any business or organizational structure, it may mean that you need to let the not so good people go as well to balance that off. But retention is just not driving out to people what they believe or the business believes that they need. It's also gaining insight to what are the motivations and drivers for those individuals, those people that are the performers in the organization, the ones that you want to keep. The challenge with retention is that no matter what type of organization or no matter what sort of strategy you have in place, you're not always going to be able to control many of the external factors. And some of those external factors can be based on whatever the environment's driving, what other organizations are driving. What you can control is what we can put into place to the best, or the organization can put to the best of their ability to retain those people. Key will be, how do you identify them? If we could just move to the next slide. So when we say where the focus should be, I would say that a matrix, and HR love doing matrix. This may be familiar for many people. There's metrics that look at how you review employees, review talent, make decisions that can go up into 6, 9. I've even seen a 12-box grid. What I find with the matrix is that you tend to, the bigger you make it, the more allowances you have for getting, I think, more grey areas. This is a really a good 4-box grid that I've used and applied in many organisations, in businesses that I've worked in, and HR teams that I've led, because it's nice and it's easy to understand, and it's easy to apply. What I'd like to ask is, is there any other similar types of matrix or frameworks that those on this call in the forum today have used and would like to share? Anything like specific to, whether you're using it in a performance framework, whether you're using it for evaluation, even if you're using it for succession plan?
So Leanne's come back and said that she's got a 9-box grid. And Leanne, you are on stage, and if you like, we can actually unmute you and you can share
how that's working as well, Leanne.
Hi, I've used it in other organisations. So where we've sat down with our talent pools and said, who's a flight risk and who's performing and who's not performing. And it's a really good tool to use to determine, as you said, who may not be a good fit for the organisation overall. So, but also to work out where your development needs to happen and those sorts of things. So. Okay.
Have you found in using, if I can ask Leanne, in your experience, have you found that sometimes a lot of work goes into this, there's a lot of development and a lot of reports and spreadsheets come out of that? How much do you feel you've seen that's actually is actioned and turned into reality, or is that where it starts to go really a steep uphill?
I think it depends on how committed the organisation is to talent development. And a lot of organisations I've been working with have been going through mergers and acquisitions. So they're not really focused on those sorts of things at that point in time. But down the track, when I've worked with organisations that are past that stage, they have been, using more talent development type tools. And I think that managers do forget about, like we do I worked at one organisation, we went through quite a rigorous process with people, and they just forget that the tool's there. So it's making it front and centre. I like your 4-box tool. It's a bit easier than a 9-box tool because.
Yeah, well, look, I think this is developed over many times, but you probably see when you're looking at there's a 6 and a 9, and as I mentioned, there was a 12, which was quite actually insane. But I think the more latitude you give, the more opportunity it is for managers to start putting people in those I haven't quite decided box. And I think with this particular one, at least it's almost like a forced, where are people going to actually sit, or what's going to best represent them? And it's It's a platform. It's a platform to use with other tools. One of the areas that I would also highlight is the value, and the bottom right, which is the value quadrant. You look at that, and a lot of people say, well, look, if you're in an organization, shouldn't everybody be pushing for development, pushing for growth, pushing for promotion? I don't know. I found that that's not always the case. I think in a lot of situations, in a lot of organizations, and that you need people that come in, do a great job, do that job really well, and go home overnight. They don't want to go into anything too complex. I think if we have everybody that's going to be sitting at the sort of top end planning strategy stage, that means in a lot of cases things don't get done.
But Mark, does that not just revert back to, like you said earlier, about identifying what actually is the motivator for each individual, because everyone's very different and their thoughts on, or their idea on what a motivation is different as well?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And sorry, Adam, to go back on your happy workplace, but it's a bit like when we talk about employee engagement, and you'll see and read a lot of things about employee engagement, and they'll want to measure a happiness scale, or they want to measure how much enthusiasm is in the workplace. There's a lot of people that are in the workplace, a lot of good talent, a lot of great talent. Just because they don't engage, just because they're not always walking around high-fiving everybody, just because they have a never-ending amount of humor and jokes, it doesn't mean that they're not engaged. They enjoy what they do. They come to work. They see the value or they see the sort of the results and the value that they produce, and that's good for them. Maybe they don't want to be included in everything. So it's exactly right, Leanne. It's finding out what is the motivation across, I guess, various areas within the business. We just got to be careful we don't broad brush it and say, and as I have seen in businesses, where they'll bring in a lot of activity, a lot of action, a lot of excitement, but then when that all dies down, there's people that just say, yeah, that was good, but it really didn't impact me. So just on that with the 4-box grid, the only other thing that I would sort of encourage is that it's something that you can implement quite quickly back in the workplace. It's not something that necessarily has to be shared, widespread. It's good to be working with managers, and it's a good way for them to start making their decisions. The only other aspect I would look at is, when you start to look at that top right-hand part of the matrix, which is looking at the invest, you need to look at a few things. I mean, what are going to be sort of the career plans for that talent that is going to be developed? What are we budgeting for? Let's make sure that we don't overpromise, because we can get drawn into a situation which can work against retention strategies by saying, what do you want? We'll deliver it, and then come back in 3 months and say, look, unfortunately, for a series of reasons, we won't be able to do that. And that disappointment is going to be far greater than not going in and committing anything in the first place.
Agreed.
Okay. If we could just go on to the next slide, that'd be great. So, when do people leave? I've always found when low motivation collides with high opportunity. Every day people will go into the workplace, or we're logging on, or however we're doing it, whether it's in person or virtually, we're going to have better days than others. And again, from a retention perspective, a business can only control so much of that. However, once you start to get a spiral in motivation, once you start to get it widespread across the organization, it doesn't take much when external opportunities come up for even the best talent or even the most committed and loyal employees to start to stray across and start to look at thinking, okay, well, yes, I have a job, but maybe I may want to look what is also outside of it. So it is trying to get that balance right. The series of points that I put down, it's not by any means exhaustive. However, it's probably some of the key areas that come up across many businesses in regards to retention. Is there any other areas those in the forum would like to share in regards to what they sort of see are good retention strategies, maybe retention strategies that you've tried to implement or the business has implemented? Might be, doesn't have to be something significant. It doesn't have to be something big. It might be just something that the organisation is may even be currently working on.
Mark, one thing I will say, because obviously talking to a lot of clients at the moment, I think a big part of that retention strategy for a lot of organizations, based on what we've experienced in the pandemic, is now focusing a bit more on that flexibility, like you were mentioning, where more organizations who potentially had offered flexibility in the past, but a lot of people didn't necessarily take them up on the opportunity, are now offering more of it. And I'm talking to sort of some of the clients there, there's different discussions around what that blended work week will look like, whether it be 3 days on, 2 days off in rotation. But even from a candidate perspective, what I'm experiencing at the moment and talking to individuals who are now coming back into the market, that flexibility is coming through as well, where they are saying, I'm open to opportunity and I'm keen to make a move, and I'm flexible on my salary if they've got flexibility. So I think that is a big thing that about retention at the moment that most organizations are looking at including in their strategy.
No, very good point. And Leanne, in your experience, do you and from what you've heard, what do you feel are some of the challenges? Because a lot of businesses, you hear that we're open to flexibility, which they are until a candidate or an employee starts discussing with it, and then their response is, well, we're still working that out.
I think now as we've coming out of the pandemic, and because we've had the working from home, we did our SNAP survey in April, and 91% of organisations automatically went to the working from home service offering. I think more and more people that have been working from home want that flexibility, and and in the past, it wasn't always, but in some organizations it was frowned upon. It was offered as an attractor, but when people actually went in and said, well, I'd like to take you up on that working from home 1 day a week, some organizations weren't open to it. Some still aren't, even after the pandemic and having everyone work from home, are still going back to the traditional way. And that's where a lot of people are now starting to want to explore their options because it's not been offered. So I think if it is on the cards and it is offered, I think it's key to be able to deliver on it, to if you're wanting to retain that top talent as well. And that doesn't go for just anyone in the business. It goes for HR as well, because I'm finding that's HR has been the backbone and that support structure through this pandemic, and they've done such great work. But the assumption is that HR always has to be on site. And maybe not necessarily as much flexibility as what they've wanted or need.
Yeah, no, as I think we were saying earlier, it's amazing. Human behavior is that we adapt very quickly, and we can take a long time to decide, okay, will it work? However, sometimes when things are forced upon us, like what has been happening, it's amazing. We don't necessarily all implode, and we do work through it. We do come up with plans and workarounds and solutions. Just on that and that flexibility, I think is going to be key. I noticed we had, and hopefully if I pick somebody, it was Nikki. I noticed that you had a Rem and Ben background. You may want to contribute or not, but I would imagine with all of this mobility and what's been happening in regards to flexible hours, shorter weeks, and that's almost a redefining of the Rem and Ben framework and how that would apply. Maybe Nikki may want to have a view on that. I just noticed that Nikki had a Rem and Ben background. Or for that matter, has anyone found in their HR space that there is a big revisitation to the Rem and Ben framework because hours are going to change?
I think, Mark, it's Leanne here again. I noticed that when organisations go through a lot of change, they go back and look at their reward and recognition programs. And, you know, simple things like thank you cards was something that I've seen, you know, so just thanking people for doing a good job has been, you know, one of the forefront things I've seen going on. I suppose because organisations are in a bit of a state of flux and, you know, they're looking at a number of things at the moment, like you said, with flexibility, maybe having to reduce employee hours, you know, and probably somehow to keep engagement going while people are working from home. That's probably on the agenda as well. So that's been my experience when I've worked with organisations that have gone through a lot of change. It's looking at reward and recognition for sure.
Okay. No, thanks for that, Leanne. I mean, it sort of reminds me of different organisations that I've worked within, and you know, as part of my role as a HR leader, as HR generalist, you know, looking after the Rem and Ben or the Comp and Ben side. I think that one that I recall where you know, businesses, a particular business unit was having challenges in regards to output and productivity and such, came up with a proposal which I thought was great. That particular business unit, only a certain amount were entitled to incentives, and usually incentives fall within the sort of commercial sales environment, and therefore all the support staff didn't receive anything. The challenge was they're working on very sort of tight profit lines, and so this business leader within the organisation I was working with came up with a proposal and said, if we can drive the performance and therefore the productivity and the revenue greater within the business, can we reward everybody? Now, you know, they may be rewarded at different sort of levels or grades or percentages, but it provided this great inclusiveness. So if we fast forward, he put together a great proposal. We ran the numbers and I promoted it up, and we talked to the leadership team and they approved it, making sure that there were some thresholds in place. And, you know, it makes me sort of think about where we are today. If we're looking at businesses that are consolidating potentially in the working day, they are creating flexibility. Maybe hours are less. But, you know, ideally businesses are, you know, very passionate about keeping as many people as they can. You know, it's not so much saying do they link it to performance, but, you know, I can sort of see that from the Rem and Ben, there may be more focus on the incentives across broader working groups than just how it had been traditionally. So again, that's sort of, you know, things that from a retention basis can be considered in the mix. The other one that I wanted to highlight, just with the employee engagement, it is through the whole employee life cycle. Interesting enough, with retention, you know, it's not just the experience that you have during, it's also what you experience at the beginning and the different stations of your life cycle as an employee within the business, and also too towards the end of it. Retention doesn't mean you need to keep people in the business in continuous employment. I've had experiences where retention has actually been greater than the organisation is in itself, in the sense that people have worked in the business, they may have outgrown, they may not see the opportunity, and sometimes businesses can't provide that opportunity. So they have left. Now, the important part is when they leave, it needs to be a transition that the business says, look, you know, we're glad that we've been able to promote you and put you in a position where you've gone on to a greater role. However, if at any point you felt like you would want to come back, then the door is always open. And I know that that's very difficult for many organizations to do and leaders for a whole series of reasons. But you've got good employees, you've got good talent, and like I was saying earlier, you can't always control every facet of that retention to keep people within the business. So they may leave the organization. In 2 years' time, they may decide they want to come back. So when I talk about retention, you know, we need to look at it in the most broadest sense. And that's why I talk about retention on that full employee life cycle. You may lose good people, but the way that they exit the business is very important because they may be the very people you may need in 12 months' time.
Mark, if you had to say and I know you do a lot of consulting and mentoring, especially in the HR professional side of things. If someone had to come to you and say to you, you know what, we're coming out of the pandemic now, we're busy re-looking at our retention strategy. What are the 3 key points you would give them to look at straight up? What are the 3 things that they would, in your opinion, in your experience, you would advise them to have in their strategy?
Sure. I think if you're looking at the, I guess, key points with a retention strategy, the first one, and it might sound, doesn't everybody do this, is have you got full visibility across your whole employee base? Do you know who you have? Do you know what they're doing? And do you understand what they're delivering? And I know a lot of people will say, yes, I do. But I've also been in situations where people have said, yes, I do. And I'd say, well, tell me, what's the exact head count? And they struggle to even pull out the head count. And that's not even in, that could be medium-sized businesses. And they say, I think it's about 500. I said, well, you need to know that. Is it 498 or is it 503? Because that sort of give doesn't mean you're getting into the detail. So I think definitely the first point is understand the organization in the regards to the structure, the people that you have in that structure, the skills that you have in that structure, and absolutely what they're delivering.
Okay.
I think the second thing is, whilst it's good to ask, employees, what do you want? How can we make your environment, your working environment better? What do you have? What would you like to change? All of those things are great. But again, I think that the business needs to evaluate before they start asking this is, can they provide? Because as mentioned before, the biggest disappointment people have in business and from a retention perspective, and you hear this a lot, is I'm leaving because of this issue. And then the leader will say, or the manager will say, yes, but I said I would do this for you. And their response is, you've said it 5 times. So I think the basis of that point is saying, need to understand, of course, what is good for the employees, what's workable, but also what can the business provide. And how I would do that, I get surveys and I like pulse surveys, and I think that, annual and cyclic employee surveys are good. Temperature check is great. What I find the best in regards to retention, and I think even more so than any time now, is have focus groups, or what I call interviews rather than exit interviews. If you have an exit interview, it's too late because they're gone, and they'll tell you something either you know, or they possibly will tell you something you didn't know, but you can't change it because they've left. The focus group, it is about working across the organization and getting a selection of your good performers, maybe from different levels, from different sectors, sitting them down, ideally having a coffee if we get back to eventually the face-to-face, or it can be virtual if that is the way. And asking them those questions, asking them, okay, so you've been with the business for a certain, 2 or 3 years' time. You are seen as one of our top performers. Why do you stay? What do you like about the business? What engages you? What gets you up in the morning and excited about the business? So I think from a retention, it's looking at saying, okay, find out the people that are staying and enjoying what they do, find out why. And I think that that's a very important. And you don't get that distilled feedback when you do the broad surveys. Ask the people in the focus groups, manage it so you're actually getting the right information back, and find out why the good performers are actually staying.
Okay.
And then I think the third thing is to go external and understand what are other businesses doing. One of the things that I found out, one of the things that I found really interesting and had come up from people that I had spoken to, especially in what I call the darkest hour of the pandemic, is that, and these are some senior people saying, what I don't understand is I'm one of 5 businesses in this industry. We have a similar client base, we have similar service offerings, similar size. What I don't understand is why have we performed or have been impacted harder than somebody else that's pretty well doing exactly the same. And there are many reasons for that. But what I would say when you look at from a retention perspective is find out what other businesses are doing. Find out how they're managing their organizations. If they're doing again flexible working, the question is not are you doing it, is have you put it into place? Is it communicated? Does everybody know what's going on? So definitely that third point I would say is get out on the market. It's not always trying to mirror the big and the best juggernauts of business. There's many great businesses that are attacking very well in this climate. Find out what they're doing well. Okay, and I think that those are the sort of areas I would look at. Those are the three main areas that I would be focusing on as far as retention. Don't overcomplicate it, but do need to get into the detail.
Mark, can I ask you just a question around, you said employee life cycle. I was talking to an employer the other day. They are losing people in the first 3 months of employment. Critical workers. What's for there? Okay.
Well, I've been in that situation a few times, either coming into a role or drilling down into different business units. If it's, I usually look at, say, let's do the first 90 days and find out what happens in that first 90 days. I think you can deep dive into, okay, why is this happening in the first 30 days? And you probably find there'd be some reaction responses like, for example, they didn't get all their office equipment, or they didn't get their laptop, they weren't inducted properly, they weren't made aware of the policy. Their payroll, their first pay cycle was late, or something happened in regards to that. So you'll always find in that first 30 days there'll be reasons why. I think you pull back from that and process map the whole from what I call bang to flash. So look at from when you bring new people on, that very point of, okay, let's start recruiting, right through to their full, say, end of their 90 days as an employee. And why I say that 90 days, because that gives that 3 months opportunity, or 90 days for people to go through the cycle of events that happen in the business. They get paid, they get their updates, they get their newsletters, they've met pretty well everybody. So I would look at saying, okay, process map, find out every step that happens. And you'll probably find in that 30 days, it will be something along the lines of not managing the expectations, potentially being told something coming into the role that wasn't delivered within that period of time. People like to come in when they start a new job, and ideally you should have everything in place for them, because there's a tendency for people to, businesses and leaders and hiring managers, to spend so much time recruiting, and then as soon as they've signed, they tend to forget about them. So I would sort of say process map that, and definitely get under each step of what's happened. Sometimes too, what I've found in that 30 days is that, you'll have people that'll take 30 days to think about it, may have had a bad experience, and so therefore they may go back to the company or the agent and say, look, I know I turned down that other role, but it hasn't worked out. Is that opportunity still there? And then you also have that other group that, aren't happy after the first 1 or 2 weeks, but take a while to make that decision. Or they're working with management that may not have the best control on these situations, and say, oh, look, don't worry about it. It'll get better.
I think just a key, and just listening to what you had to say there, I think retention starts from day one. Your retention strategy kicks in from day one. And when I say day one, it's even from that recruitment stage, because that recruitment process that you go through will set up that engagement from day one. And I know when I moved to Australia and I started in my first role, having never been here, even on holiday or seen it, but when I joined my first organization, I arrived at the office and I had a computer screen and a box, but I had no mouse and no phone. And it was like that for the first couple of days. And my initial thing was, I've just moved countries. What have I done? It sorted itself out. But I think that engagement and retention strategy starts from day one, which is key.
I totally agree, and I mean, I've always been probably, and I'm sure I frustrated a lot of my team, but to the point where I want if they've got business cards, I want business cards on their desk. I want their laptop ready. I want when they sit down at their desk or in their workstation, they don't have to go and find out where IT is. There's a pop-up. Tell me when you're online. I'll come up and see you. The thing is, all of the things that happen, especially in that process, in those first couple of days, it's what people all have to do anyway. So I always say, well, just coordinate it. I remember somebody said to us once, I disagree. I'm not paying. I'm not budgeting or paying for the business cards until they've been here, 30 days. And ironic about this is that was somebody who was a commercial director. And I said, what's the worst can happen? The worst that can happen is that you've lost, the equivalent of $25 in business cards because they may not start. But I said, weigh that up against the face of that person when they get the business cards, and what they do is they go home and they probably give it to everybody in the neighborhood and pretty well everybody they meet on their way home. So you're right. Retention is just not after a period of time of being in the business. Retention really should start from the moment that candidate or that new employee is ready to commence in the business. And, I always, if I'm so bold to say, find it unacceptable when businesses say, well, look, we just don't do it like that, or even worse, when people say, well, look, let me tell you how my experience was. And really, if you've had a bad experience, you've got a responsibility to say, okay, I'm not going to let that happen to somebody else.
Very true.
Mm.
Now, Mark, if I can ask, and I'll ask everyone that's in the forum today shortly, but having been in business and in executive roles where you have been able to sort of make a lot of positive changes or impacts in business, a retention strategy that an organization had prior to COVID, now coming out of COVID, what do you think the big difference would be between the two, or what do organizations need to reevaluate now post-COVID?
It's a really great question. I think where we were to where we are, I would be definitely having a big review on areas such as our the succession planning, and what has been scoped out in those succession plans. I think that there may have been a view that, okay, well, we know who the successors are, we know who we're going to develop, we know who we're going to engage. That's all changed now. Some of the people that you feel, or some people, great people in the business that you feel will absolutely stay, potentially may leave. So I would be definitely looking at the succession planning, because I think the whole scope on skills, on experience, on need for the organization to deliver, that's definitely changed. And I also think that the other aspect with the retention is whatever it's almost like a blind faith, because whatever you were using to retain people previously, if it was working, great, but I'd still reevaluate it. If it wasn't working, then it's not going to get better now. So definitely I would be revisiting them. And, attrition is going to be part of that. But the only other thing, I would add too is I've experienced businesses where they'll say, we're doing a great job because we have zero attrition, and we have a very high retention, and we've got people that have been here for decades and that. And then in the next breath, they say, however, our biggest challenge is innovation and creativity. And you're thinking, well, if you've never brought anybody in and you've got the same group of people, then potentially that may be your challenge. So,
very true. I think if I can put a question out to everyone else that's on the forum, and in terms of your current sort of retention strategy, a lot of the time, in order to make a change, or from an HR professional's background, there's certain things you'd love to add to that strategy, but potentially you don't get the buy-in, or there's a very lengthy process you have to go through to get the approval to make a change. But if you could add one thing to your recruitment strategy without that need of approval, what would you change or add to your strategy now? I know some of you might have to put it into the chat comment, but if you'd like to, that would be great, just so we can hear from your experience in your organizations what you feel would add value to that retention strategy.
So this is almost, if I was CEO for the day,
correct,
and you had carte blanche on whatever you could implement, because you probably may know more than the CEO, what would it be? What would you do?
Leanne, since you're on the screen, and I'm going to pick on you again, any thoughts from your perspective, if you could? You might just need to unmute yourself, though.
Big magic wand, Leanne.
Well, hearing a lot about like this, well, flexibility is definite. Keep flexibility on the table, because we've pushed for a long time in HR to have flexibility. Now we were forced to have it, and it's kind of worked in a way. It's it was difficult for people that had multiple things going on at home, but I think flexibility, definitely I've noticed a few organizations keeping like 3 days a week at work, 2 days at home. I think that's a good balance, so keep that going. I'd be looking at the health and safety in the organisation. People are worried, with the outbreak in Victoria, that could be, a concern for people. Is our work environment safe? So I think, that should be considered. I'll be checking in with the health and well-being of people a lot, because there's been multiple things happening in people's lives with this change. So I think that, people might have lost their jobs, or, their family members might have lost their jobs, or something like that going on. So, I would be checking in with their health and well-being on a retention level. One place I was working at just recently, we just continued to do pulse surveys to see how people were travelling. And, we weren't getting a really big response, like probably about 50% of employees were responding. So there's the other 50%. What are they thinking and doing? I'd be focusing on online stuff as well, like, ramping up your online capability, because the pandemic highlighted, in one place I was just working at recently, that we weren't really ready to cater for online type capacity to be able to communicate with people clearly. And then just focus on, just be listening to your people, just have listening tours, maybe see what's going on for them out in the workplace, the usual stuff that you do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, building a bit on that too, would be looking, as I mentioned, and on these sort of in-groups or focus groups as well, which is different to working groups. I mean, not with any other set agenda, but to get key people in the business to start feeding back, what is the vibe, what is the temperature out there, what are people saying. There was somebody last week, and very short story. Anyway, he is a senior person in a business. There's a couple of probably about 2,500 people, and he said, "Look, I'm getting all these people back. they say they want to come back, but I'm not sure, and I'm communicating this. And he said, how do you get how do I get my handle on what people are really thinking? And I said, well, just, be bold and ask them. And, like you were saying, Leanne, I said they were doing pulse surveys. I said, put out a pulse survey every day, change it around. I said, but the first one is ask everybody, are you happy to be back in the workplace today? The interesting thing is, he had quite a good response. He had about just over 70% people come back and say yes. He got back in contact with me and he said to me, gee, I don't know what I'm worrying about. And I guess the whole point of that is they've got to be careful, especially in leadership, they don't overcomplicate or get too confusing with the messages. That's why it's very important to keep connected to people. But as I said, to try and judge and assess what is the mood of the organization, and what people are enjoying and what people aren't.
Just to let you know, Mark, Jemima's put up a chat saying she would like more contact with her direct manager regarding individual circumstances. So people have gone through a lot and are showing a bit of compassion goes a long way in supporting their staff to come back to work as well.
Okay, it's a good question. When Jemima, you've said you'd like more contact. I'm not sure if that means that it's that person's, your manager's availability, or are they somebody that potentially is not approachable, or some people work too regimented or too rigid and everything has to be within, sort of set schedules and that. But I think that, if your manager is in a position, or as I always say in HR, the custodian of people, then you do have a certain, I feel, responsibility to at least highlight some of those concerns that are coming back. One suggestion may be, for them to either set up a town hall, even if it's a virtual town hall, and field some of those questions. The challenge is when people don't know what's going on, or there's a gap in information. Unfortunately, people, again, human behavior, people don't fill it with positive, they'll fill it with negative. And I think here, because everything is continually changing, people unfortunately think the worst is in store, not the best. But I guess in summary, look, I've even known, with people that I've reported up to, their time is crazy. So I try and schedule meetings with them. I schedule appointments with them to sit down and have a one-item agenda. And if I can get that one item discussed and addressed and walk away thinking, okay, well, we've really explored that, I always find that that's a good way. Some managers, it's not easy to get them on the run. So if, I guess, like I was saying earlier, if it's accessibility, then sort of structure that time frame to meet with them and discuss those issues. But I think if there are concerns with people in the business, then that does need to be promoted up. The only other thing is I picked up on the word compassion. Everybody handles change very differently, and some people handle it in a way that could come out that they aren't compassionate. I don't know the details, so I can't fairly say. But what I can say is people just manage it differently. Some people in certain crisis will have a very sort of almost militant, abrupt approach, and that's just how they control the situation. On the same token, you also have people that run around and are very overt and very humorous, and unfortunately, sometimes those people don't get things done because they're more of in a panic. So I just thought I'd pick up on that word when you said compassion.
Perfect.
Okay. Look, I think aware of time, we'll just move on to that next slide. This is a little model, or a model done by a gentleman called Scott Wintrip. Scott Wintrip is a gentleman based in the US and is extremely passionate about recruitment, extremely compassionate about the employee life cycle. and the employee experience. But he has, I shouldn't say but, when I say employee lifestyle, employee experience, what I particularly like when if you get the chance to listen to some of his bites online and everything like that, he has some very practical approaches. And I like this model. It's called the talent wealth spectrum. Why I like it, I like models that you can actually draw out quite quickly. And if some on the call have seen it, I think you'd agree it's got great clarity. If you haven't, it's a good model that you can etch out. And I think also too, what I like about it is fairly self-explanatory. So we've all worked in those type of environments. Obviously, your talent rich is what they would sort of see as those that are excelling, they're leading, they're probably driving the industry, or driving the new industry or the new market or the new landscape. The ones that are in the talent poor, it doesn't. I should qualify. This doesn't reflect on size of business. This is just how the business operates. So I think it's just something that it's good to reflect on, and maybe when you look at that, go back, and when you go back to the workplace, or re-engage back after the call into the office world, do you feel that there's a correlation between sort of talent rich through to talent poor, and also too from the excelling down to the scramble crazy struggling organization? So it's a good model. It's a good talking piece, and I think it's a really good model to promote up those that are HR managers. It's a good discussion when you're talking up to either your managers or talking across to the business. It can really start to talk into definitely areas of retention. So we may say, okay, well, we are talent rich, but are we excelling? Are we leading? Are we setting the trends? Others may sort of say that, look, we're talent strong, that should be good enough. And yes, it could be a good area to be operating in. But one thing that is consistent through all of those, it's just not about, I guess, the organization or the leadership. It is driven by talent. So the successes in those 4 areas are driven by talent. And so the level of talent that is acquired and retained is going to be one of the most significant impacts to where, I guess, an organization sits in that wealth spectrum. So again, it's just a model to consider. And then really on my last slide is a quote that, as we all know, finding top talent is not too difficult. I used to put before the pandemic, finding top talent is not difficult. It's a little bit difficult because I think what's happening now is that we've got a lot of people that if they're not actively out on the market through choice, they may start to be exploring it. And, it is a reality that, finding good talent is not too difficult. Finding good people, as I always say, good people are usually working in good companies. But it's a little bit of a different game now. But what is key is preventing top talent from leaving is almost impossible. As I've said to businesses and leaders and even consulting and that by the time somebody resigns, usually you're 6 months too late. And if somebody is going to turn around and say, well, look, can we discuss the financial aspect of it, and, offering them more benefits or offering them more money, we all know as HR professionals that there is absolutely no longevity in that whatsoever, because the reasons people resign, sometimes, of course, it can be to do with the financial side, but it's not something that's going to sustain. There's other elements and influences for that. So I always say, rule of thumb, by the time you get the resignation letter, it's 6 months too late, which means that we need to sort of start well back and ensure that it doesn't get to that point. We can't control it in every situation. We can't always control the external environment. But what we can do is do as much as we can with the internal environment, retain the right people. Unfortunately, we do have to let go of the people that may not be meeting the requirements for the business. And I know that's a That's a big statement to make under the current climate. But you know, it is getting that balance right. And also probably on a final point, you know, in retention, it's not about person for 40 years or 10 years. You know, 3 to 5 years, even 3 years is good, as long as there is a plan. You know, loyalty is not always linked to tenure. So it's retaining the good people for what is required for the business, and if that can continue on, fantastic. If it can't continue on, then look, you know, at times that may happen, and you do lose good people. As long as you don't lose more good people, then you're retaining.
Correct. I don't know if anyone's got any questions that they want to pose to Mark, so we can maybe run through those and get see if we can get an answer for you. I will say, Mark, from this forum, the one thing that I have for me has been a takeaway is that in-house meetings, so not your exit interviews or an interview. I think that's really good, because I do know that a lot of companies do put out sort of, you know, pulse, not necessarily pulse surveys, but like annual surveys to their employees. And often the feedback I get from that is it's great to get that information. And when they start doing them, they get a lot of feedback. But it's what's done with that information and what's shared. And sometimes organizations, when they do those sort of surveys, it's not always structured to have certain ideas and what they're wanting to get out from it to be able to make changes. Quite broad, which makes it difficult to make changes to everything. But I do think that sort of internal, in-house interviews are really probably, or focus groups is probably really good, because you can actually get people a little bit more engaged and they feel like they've been heard, as opposed to just ticking a box. So that was my takeaway. Thank you for that. But anyone else got any questions they want to ask Mark?
I'd just say on that, on the in-house one, there's a lot of value, and it's quite impactful. And from a HR perspective, and those are HR professionals on this call, trust me, it'll be something that if you promote to your stakeholders, they're never going to say, no, that's a bad idea. They're going to say, great, the more information I can get about what's happening in the business and from my people would be fantastic. I mean, of course, it's not designed for it to be documented and circulated, but it is very, very impactful.
Perfect. Well, it doesn't seem we've got any additional questions, so we bang on the hour. So, Mark, thank you very much for your time, for your presentation, and for your wisdom and knowledge you have shared with us today. It's really appreciated. And thank you to everyone for joining us. I will check in with everyone in the next week just to get your thoughts and some feedback. And we will definitely keep you posted on any future HR forums that we do have. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Mark. He is very active on LinkedIn. He has some really good articles that he shares, so feel free to link up with him there. But other than that, I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, everyone.